Welcome to another edition of the Legacy Warriors podcast, where we break down the top two feeder leagues to the UFC, whether it's the LFA, which actually has a card going down on Saturday, and I'll be breaking that down for you guys tomorrow, or Cage Warriors, which has their Cage Warriors 186 card going down Friday afternoon, Eastern time, that is. And that is an appetizer for the UFC London card going down the next day in the same town. So this is a great opportunity for these prospects to show out in front of the UFC brass, but also take advantage of that trickle down that the UFC provides whenever they come to a region. This card is headlined by two title fights. In the main event, we got Hardwick taking on a very game and very difficult challenge in Javier Garcia, who is a former LFA champion. And then it's technically not the co-main event, but actually the main event of the prelims will be the second title fight, which is between Harry's brother, George Hardwick, taking on an LFA veteran and Samuel Silva, and then obviously a ton of other great UK talent sprinkled out throughout the card. It is a great setup for that UFC London card the next day in the same town. So I love Cage Warriors, love the LFA, and that's why I love breaking down these fights for you guys. So I do appreciate all the new viewers and listeners that we've been getting, especially with slapping the last couple of Cage Warriors cards that we've been covering for you guys as well. So let's hope we can continue to cash some tickets for you guys in preparation for the big UFC card the following night. So I do quickly want to plug the MMA Fight Archive. If you do researching of your own, whether you're a predictor, analyst, I should say, coach, fighter, commentator even, the MMA Fight Archive is your one-stop shop to ensure you're getting as much information on these fighters so you know what to expect when they step foot in the cage on the weekend. We got as many direct links as you could possibly find on these fighters on the MMA Fight Archive, and we just surpassed 5,000 fighter profiles for you to be able to browse through and check out. And again, just know what you're getting into, whether you're looking to bet some of these guys or fade them, or again, just break them down and predict them. Or if you're the coach looking to game plan against these fighters, the MMA Fight Archive has you covered. 19 different promotions from all over the world, 5,000 fighter profiles, like I said, and a 7-day free trial for you to try it out for free. Link in the description. Once again, that is the MMA Fight Archive. All right. Let's not waste any more time. I believe we have a 14-fight card to get through for this Cage Warriors card, so let's get right into it. First fight up, Harry Shaw coming in at minus 145, going up against Jan Masek, who comes in at plus 115. Now, Shaw is a very solid GBTT, or Great Britain top team prospect, showcases solid striking, decent grappling, but grappling is where he's kind of struggled in the past. But it was impressive to see him in his last matchup, I believe against Steph Murray, where he showcased great submission defense when he was put in bad spots early in that fight, and then from there was able to utilize his striking advantage to batter Murray over 15 minutes and earn that a victory. He's going up against Jan Masek, who's a solid kickboxer himself. He's 1-1 now as a pro. Last time around was actually out grappled by a teammate of Harry Shaw. So maybe Shaw has a little bit of a blueprint here, but I was impressed by some of the resistance that we saw from Masek that night, showcasing that he can buck out of bad positions, but he still finds himself in these bad spots a little bit too long, which does not allow his striking advantage in certain fights to really separate himself from the grappling that he ends up facing. Now, I believe Shaw is the better fighter here, but what gives me a little bit of pause in terms of having uber confidence in him here is the experience of Masek. Now, he had a pretty tumultuous amateur run. I believe he came out with a losing record, if I'm not mistaken. But that does mean he still has a lot of experience, and his striking is very solid. So if Shaw's unable to get this to the ground and actually mix it up well enough, Masek could provide some issues. But I'm still going to end up on the Shaw side. I think he has more potential, and I think his overall MMA game is superior here. I think Masek will have a little bit of a striking advantage, but not enough that Shaw won't be able to overcome that. I think we'll see him mix up the martial arts, getting some takedowns, keeping Masek on the defensive, and then grinding this fight out and winning it on the scorecards. I don't mind this minus 145 line, taking a little bit of action from the minus 130 that I saw yesterday, but I'm going to go with the GBTT prospect here to pull off the victory here in the first fight of the night. All right, next up, we got a squash match, so I'm not going to talk about it too much here, where we got Craig Rawlins coming in at plus 1,100, going up against Joe Middleton, coming in at minus 2,300. Now, I still do my due diligence in researching both sides, even in squash matches like this, but there's nothing that Rawlins does that gives me intrigue into thinking that he can pull off the upset here. Middleton is just a much better version of him and a superior grappler, and I think it's just a matter of time before Middleton gets this to the ground and strangles Rawlins, and I expect that to happen within the first round. So give me Middleton and Middleton by submission, but again, word of advice, never parlay anything at that minus 2,000 line. It just it doesn't pay off. It's not worth it, especially in a volatile sport like mixed martial arts. All right, next up, we got Tommy Brunning coming in at minus 130, going up against Kadeem Perkins, another GBTT prospect who comes in at plus 100. Now, starting off on the Brunning side, probably one of my favorite nicknames in the promotion with Big Tings. Very physical fighter, but unfortunately is now finding himself on a 2-fight losing streak. Both of those losses coming by first round submissions, showcasing that, yeah, he can be physical, but he really needs to reel in the BJJ aspect of his game so he can stay out of some of these submissions. Usually when he wins, it requires him utilizing his physicality and his strength to bully opponents in the clinch and in the grappling realm, but better BJJ specialists are going to be able to tie him up in submissions, hence what we saw from his last two matchups. He has potential, but he's still very raw. He's still very rigid in terms of some of the technical skills that he brings to the table. Average striking, but it's really his physicality and strength that allows him to get his wins. He's going up against Kadeem Perkins, who's been on a bit of a roller coaster ever since joining the MMA ranks. He went 4-0 as an amateur to start, then went on a 3-fight losing streak, and then he was able to go pro back in December and was able to get the win there. But it was a very grueling back and forth battle, largely in the clinch and grappling realm, where he was able to get the better of his opponents for the first 2 rounds, and then it seemed like he fell off in the 3rd round, but still had done enough to still get that victory there. Both guys, Perkins and Brunning, nothing special in the striking realm. I think most of their success normally comes when they get into the grappling realm, but I think that Brunning's physicality will be enough for him to pull off the victory here. Perkins is nothing special in the BJJ realm, so I don't think Brunning will find himself in a bad spot where he ends up getting submitted. I think it'll be Brunning that establishes those dominant positions and maybe even rains down a TKO stoppage here to actually get his hand raised. So I'm going to go Brunning. Maybe late stoppage. But again, both these guys very raw, still refining a large part of their game if they want to make it to the next level. All right, next up, Danny Blundell coming in at plus 285, going up against Rafael Aronov, who comes in at minus 360. Now, Blundell, another guy that I'm very surprised is in the Cage Warriors promotion. He took off just after his second fight. He had taken off 4.5 years away from action. And again, doesn't seem like anything special. He leans on his BJJ the most, but his wrestling is not all that good, nor is his striking. Although we did see him bloody the nose of his last opponent, a little bit more than we expected until his opponent, Pell, was finally able to pull off that body kick KO finish. There's nothing special in his game. Rafael Aronov, on the other hand, is the brother of the guy co-main eventing this card, or not co-main eventing, but is on the main card, in Eli Aronov. But Rafael has a little bit more Cage Warriors experience. He's 2-2 through 4 fights with the promotion. He's a BJJ brown belt, and he's quite chaotic. He is a guy that likes to create chaos, throw big shots, and try to look for ways to submit his opponents by taking them to the ground as well. He's a BJJ brown belt with a salty record, but he's pulled off a few upsets since joining the promotion, whether it was that finish over Ben Petches Kelly or even that comeback victory over veteran Jamie Richardson. This is a guy that can pull off victory from the jaws of defeat if he really, finds the opportunities to capitalize on. I like Aronov in this spot, but I'm kind of surprised he's all the way up at minus 360. This is a guy that can definitely fumble the bag, as we know, with his 6-6 record. But Blundell, Again, nothing special. I'd be very surprised if he's able to catch Aronov with anything or even be able to land a big enough shot to put him on skates. So I'm going to pick Aronov here. Clearly taken a lot of action recently, as I think he was about minus 280 when I researched this matchup, now finding himself at minus 360. I definitely want to stay off at that number, but I still think he ends up winning this matchup. Probably club and sub in this spot. All right, next up, Riri Hudson coming in at minus 260, going up against Miriam Grubb, who comes in at plus 200. Now, on the Hudson side of things, she came up short in her last fight as a minus 260 favorite, a number that she finds herself at this week. And again, she comes from a Muay Thai background, usually puts together very solid combinations, utilizes the Muay Thai clinch very well. Her defensive grappling is slowly improving, but it was kind of surprising to see her come up short against Alish Smith the way that she did last time. It was competitive through the first about round and a half before Smith seemed to start blooding the nose of Hudson, and it seemed like she was landing with a little bit more emphasis, and it was slowly breaking Hudson down, which led to Alish Smith finally finding that finish, like I said, halfway through that first round. It seemed like the size advantage of Smith seemed to play a little bit into the significance of those shots landing. So it was kind of surprising to see a Hudson fumble the bag the way that she did, but it's also bringing and shedding some light on the fact that she, we need to slow down in terms of the hype that we have around her. She's a solid fighter, trains out of a solid camp as well. But I got some question marks, especially when she deals with somebody that can match her in the intensity in the striking realm. And she might be facing that here in a fighter in Miriam Grubb, who started her amateur career 0-3 and then finished it off with a 6-fight winning streak. Now she turns to the pro ranks, and I was really expecting to see a little bit of a scrub here. Not meaning to rhyme with Grubb, but I was really thinking that this was going to be a spot that Cage Warriors was going to try to hand Hudson a layup to try to get back onto her winning ways, but Grubb is really not that bad. The last win she actually has on her amateur record is a defeat of an opponent that had given Grubb the last defeat of her amateur career. So she was able to showcase that she is improving her game. She's very tenacious in the striking realm. She loves to utilize knees in the Muay Thai clinch, and I'm very excited to see how she tries to transfer those knees, not just to the body, which is, obviously amateur rules, but also taking them to the head now. She's very strong. It's clear just by looking at her Instagram page that she is working on her physicality and strength and conditioning a ton, which will make her a very difficult fighter to keep down and keep in bad positions. She's very aggressive in the striking realm, and she has some solid chops in the striking realm as well, in the grappling realm, where she's able to take opponents to the ground and smother them from that top position and find those spots that she needs to let go of big damage or even find a submission. I think a lot of people are overlooking Grubb here. I'm a big Hudson fan. I think that she has some solid potential, nasty striking skills as well. But I think Grubb can match her in the striking realm and possibly even get this fight to the ground and possibly have some major success there as well. So I'm going to go with the strength of Grubb here. I'm going to go with her aggressiveness, her tenacity, and the fact that she's a plus 200 underdog gives me even more reason to want to back her in the spot. So I'm going to go Grubb. I'm going to go Grubb by decision. But again, don't overlook her at all because she's coming in as a pro debut. And again, we know Cage Warriors likely is on the Hudson side of things in terms of wanting to promote her. But just as we saw in Hudson's last fight, she is the one that has to do the work at the end of the day by stepping foot in the cage. And I think she's really up against it here with Grubb. So I'm going to go Grubb and Grubb by decision. But again, plus 200, sign me up. All right, next up, we got Cameron Stewart coming in at plus 120, going up against Daniel Crooks-May, who comes in at minus 150. Now, Stewart came up short as a pretty solid favorite in his pro debut last time around, as he was defeated by a 1-1 fighter. I believe a fighter that's actually a training partner, or actually not a training partner. I was going to say training partner of Crooks-May, but he's actually a training partner of Paddy Pimblett, training out of Next Gym. Cameron Stewart, not entirely sure what gym he's training out of. It seems like more of a low-level gym more than anything. Had a respectable 7-2 record as an amateur champion on the regional scene or the amateur scene. Decent striking, but as we saw in his last fight, that's where he ended up coming up short. Normally, he looks to get fights into the grappling realm and try to smother opponents there, but he also has shown an inability to get his last opponent to the ground and keep them there. So I think it's going to get harder for him to do so in the pro ranks. And he's really nothing special. He's in good shape. Maybe a good project. Maybe a kid with potential, but I don't really see it at this point in time. And Crooks-May might find himself in the same position. Both guys are 0-1 as pros, but I think the no contest on Crooks-May last fight is kind of an indication of where this kid's potential actually is. Now, Crooks-May lost his first pro fight by submission pretty quickly, I believe it was, but then he was able to have a pretty solid bounce back fight last time around against Jordan Little, I should say, which was back in November. Tough first round, competitive first round until he got hit with the head kick, but he really started to march back in the second round, and he was really taking over that fight. It seemed like he was really sucking the energy dry of his opponent, and he got him into that weird position where a lot of fighters like to play that, downed and not downed opponent game, before the rules changed. That's when like guys are kind of hunched over and they're like picking their hand up off the ground, and that was, either declaring them a downed opponent where they couldn't be kneed to the head, and if they picked it up, then they could be kneed to the head. And it seemed like Little was playing that game a little bit, and that ultimately led to Crooks-May landing that illegal knee that ended up stopping the fight. It was a pretty bad knee, I'll give him that, but again, like, it's clear that Little was on the way out there. So I really thought that Crooks-May was going to start to take over and actually end up winning that fight. He has some decent power in his hands, good striker, good speed, good athleticism. His grappling game very much improved as well. And again, a very solid training a stable of training partners that he has. Obviously, Brad Pickett helming the coaching duties for him as well. And I think he has some very solid potential. I think this is a good fight for him to try to, halt the resurgence of Stewart, or what Stewart is trying to get back into. And I'm fine with this minus 150 line as well. Crooks-May is really going to have to fumble the bag here badly if he ends up losing this matchup, but I think that Crooks-May will do a good job in terms of controlling where it takes place. I think he's the better striker. I think he's quicker. I think he has more power. And if he wants to take this into the grappling realm, I think he can hold his own on the mat against a guy like Stewart. So give me Crooks-May by decision, maybe even a second or third round stoppage if this ends up being plainly a striking battle. All right, next up, Joanny Scott coming in at minus 650, going up against Johnny Touma, who comes in at plus 475. Now, starting off on the Scott side of things, it was an ugly win, but it was a 1-0, no less, in his last matchup against David Scarano. That was a fight where he fought a very tough guy in Scarano, a guy that, very unorthodox with how he continuously presses forward, usually relying on his durability and aggressiveness to break fighters, just as we saw Scarano do last time around against Florian Doskaj. But Scott was able to thwart that, landing big shots, taking advantage of some of the shortcomings in Scarano's striking game, getting it into the grappling realm and staying safe against a BJJ black belt. I think it showcased the potential of Scott. And I think he needed that type of fight to really progress his game and become even better. He's explosive. He's fast. 8-0-1 as an amateur, now 6-1 as a pro. He was mainly a guy that relied heavily on his power striking approach. But we're seeing over his last couple of fights that he can grapple if he needs to as well. Very solid prospect. And, originally was a minus 1,400 in this matchup. So a lot of money coming in on Johnny Touma to bring Scott down to minus 650. And I'm happy about that because Touma, he's 1-2 over his last 3 fights, which were all championship fights. Now he makes his Cage Warriors debut, but this is a guy that likes to march forward, put pressure on his opponents, but keeps his hands a little bit too low, especially against a guy like Joanny Scott, who's going to take advantage of that. I'm more than happy to take the chalk on Scott in the spot, as I think he can land those big shots and actually even get Touma out of there. If Touma wants to take this to the ground, I don't think he can have much success there. Touma had an extensive amateur background, going 13-8 from 2017 to 2020, but there's nothing special about the kid. Again, it's mainly his aggressiveness that has won him a lot of his fights, but that's that's very easy to do in the early stages of your mixed martial arts career until you start fighting technically better fighters and guys that can counter that aggressiveness with big power shots of their own or even grappling. But I think think Scott has Touma pretty much covered everywhere in this matchup, and I think that aggressiveness will eventually lead to Scott getting the knockout here. I know Scott's not a big knockout puncher. Only one of his 6 wins are by KO, TKO, but if the under 2.5 in this matchup is at decent plus money, I'll definitely bite on it, but I also don't mind taking the chalk on Scott at minus 650 either. All right, the first of 2 title fights now. Again, this one headlines the prelim portion of this Cage Warriors 186 card. We got George Hardwick coming in at minus 550, going up against Samuel Silva, who comes in at plus 400. Now, Hardwick came up short on the 2023 Contender Series, going up against a Fury FC champion in Abdul Karim Al-Sawadi. And Al-Sawadi used a completely different game than we were used to seeing him, which probably caught George Hardwick off guard. Hardwick is a guy that normally likes to utilize that high pressure, high activity game, breaking his opponents with pressure, output, staying on the gas, putting together combinations, and leaning on that durability of his, which often, he definitely gets hit, but he usually does a good job in terms of taking those big shots and then really starting to force that pressure on his opponents, break them down, and then TKO them in deep waters. He's very good in the defensive grappling realm as well, which allows him to keep fights where he feels most comfortable. And to me, that's utilizing his boxing and kickboxing and marching opponents down. But he could also get into the grappling realm if he needs to offensively and still have some good success in that realm. So, I think that loss against Abdul Karim Al-Sawadi was a bit of a wake-up call for Hardwick. I think he's still UFC worthy. This guy is a high-caliber fighter, and I think it's just a matter of time before he ends up getting another shot on the Contender Series or just getting signed straight to the promotion. But he's going up against a very tough guy here in Samuel Silva. Now, Silva's last win and actually last fight was in January of 2024, where he defeated Anderson Fajeda, a fight that I believe it was it was pretty competitive until Silva was able to hurt him and get him out of there. I think it was a guillotine, if I'm not mistaken, that he was able to get the win. He was scheduled to fight for LFA again in November, but that fight was canceled. Not entirely sure why. He rides a 4-fight winning streak now, dating back which is on the back end of a knockout loss that he received just 2 years ago. The split decision win of Samuel Silva over Rodrigo Liggio was a fight against a guy that was on the Contender Series, and I think that really put Silva on the UFC's radar. So to see him get this Cage Warriors opportunity, fighting for a title, is very solid because he is a higher level regional talent guy. Has some very good Muay Thai, good kickboxing, although he leaves a lot of openings in the defensive striking realm, which is why we've seen him get hit and hurt in a lot of fights. He's been able to bounce back in some of those matchups and still get wins, like we saw in the Liggio fight. Likes to stay very active in BJJ competition as well. Loves to attack with a ton of submissions, even if it puts himself in a bad position. This should be a fun fight. I think this will be more competitive than the minus 550 on Hardwick indicates, so I'm going to have to pass on this fight, but I do think Hardwick wins this fight. There is usually a little bit of an issue that a lot of overseas guys have when they come over to London or fighting in the background of some of these homegrown guys, and usually we see a little bit of a dip in their performances, and I think that we'll end up seeing that here against Silva. He might be able to be competitive early, but I fully expect Hardwick to showcase his classic George Hardwick style, making it competitive early, but then starting to pull away in the second, third, and fourth rounds. And I think that we see Hardwick actually find the finish probably in the 4th or 5th round in this matchup. I'm very intrigued to see what the totals are, because I'd be willing to take the over up until 2.5, because I could see this getting into the 4th rounds, 3rd round even. And I think that we'll see Hardwick actually muster up that finish later on in this fight. So give me a Hardwick by TKO, and still, I guess, Hardwick, the Cage Warriors champion there. All right. Moving over to the main card now, we got Ali Sarwa coming in at minus 380, going up against Cage Warriors short notice replacement and debutant Yadwinder Singh, who comes in at plus 320. Now, Sarwa, in his flagship Cage Warriors debut last time around, stuck to his usual finishing ways. He was able to get his opponent out of there in 55 seconds, and all 6 of his wins, I believe now as a pro, or 5 wins, have come under 2.5 minutes. He makes short work of his opponents, showcasing his striking advantage in a lot of his matchups, picking them apart and putting them away. He's very quick with his hand speed. He has solid kicks as well, but it's really his precision and accuracy with his striking that makes him so dangerous. On the amateur scene, he was taken advantage of by superior grapplers, but it's clear he's working on that aspect of his game to be even more competitive now that he's a pro. He was originally scheduled to fight Rory Evans, which I thought was going to be a little bit more difficult of a matchup than who he's fighting this weekend, but he'll still get challenged in the grappling round by Yad Winder. Now, Yad is now 2-2 since returning after a 6-year-long layoff. His wins have come against very mediocre competition as of late. Guys that have been able to get the better of him are either much superior grapplers or guys with enough knockout power to finish him quickly. I wish he was a little bit more active during that 6-year-long layoff, right? I know he's been training. I know a couple of his training partners. I know that he's training up there in Manchester now as well. So he's been there for about 6 or 7 months, refining his game, trying to improve the grappling even more. He's already a solid wrestler. He loves that arm triangle choke. But the question becomes when he fights legitimate resistance and guys that are able to stop his takedowns, what it's going to look like for him here. I like Sarwa. It's tough to pick against a fellow Punjabi fighter, but I think Sarwa's striking advantage is going to be a little bit too much for Singh. I think if Singh can get this to the ground, things will obviously be a little bit more intriguing, and that's what ultimately keeps me off of wanting to parlay Sarwa even at minus 380, because Singh's top pressure is not all that bad, but we still have to see how much of an improvement to that defensive grappling game we're going to get from Sarwa, because if he can't get off his back, Singh makes this plus 320 look damn good. But I believe actually in the improvements that Sarwa has been making, not just with his get-ups, but his ability to just completely shut takedowns down. I think he'll have a speed advantage, and I ultimately think his striking advantage is going to end up being too much for Singh here, leading to Sarwa getting the TKO finish within a round and a half. I'm hoping I'm wrong. I love me some Singh. I love me some Punjabi fighters trying to make a name for themselves on these bigger stages. I hope he wins, but I have to go with Sarwa in terms of an unbiased prediction here, and I think he gets the KO, like I said, within a round and a half. All right, next up, Tarek Pell coming in at minus 115, going up against Xhaferi, who also comes in at minus 115. So you're getting pretty much a pick-em price here. Now, starting off on the Pell side of things, he successfully bounced back from a March 2024 loss last time around by defeating Danny Blundell, who we talked about earlier on this card. But it wasn't that great of a performance from Pell. For about 3 minutes, Pell couldn't get off on any offense, and I don't know if he was just overthinking it or if it was the constant output from Blundell that bloodied the nose of Pell that caused Pell to just kind of freeze in some of those spots. He eventually engaged in a grappling sequence that led to Pell waking up a little bit more, and then on the feet, he finally landed a beautiful body kick that crumpled Blundell, and he was able to get the finish. Now, Pell was originally a part of the MMA Fight Academy experiment, which is going down in San Diego, alongside like Anthony Orozco, Teddy Stringer, and those guys. But he has recently glued himself to the side of Jordan Vucenic. Wherever Vucenic goes, it seems like Pell goes. And obviously, both these guys fighting on the same weekend, they probably tune their training camps in together here. Pell is a guy that would normally implement his grappling, but it seems that his 22-second knockout win over Michael Blair back in November of 2023 has kind of improved the confidence in his striking game, which is not the best of things, right? You want to stick with what you're best at, and that's usually grappling for Pell, which even then, I don't think it's all that great. Now, he's going up against a guy, in my opinion, that's not getting enough love or talked about enough, considering the type of potential I expect from him. In Xhaferi, his lone professional defeat was to Simone Patrizzi, a fight that I thought he was winning about 2.5 rounds of before he eventually slowed down and allowed Patrizzi to get the finish there. But I think he learned a lot from that fight. Last time around against Aaron Johnson, immediately got the fight to the ground and found a submission within 2 rounds. This guy's a very strong grappler with a very solid striking game as well. Trained out of a bunch of different gyms, from a Great Britain top team to the All-Stars gym in Sweden to even Bang Tao Muay Thai in Thailand. He seems to be a little bit of a nomad in terms of his training, jumping from camp to camp. But this guy's pretty damn skillful. The one issue that I have that's kind of keeping me from making him a lock of the night play is the cardio issue, right? That obviously bit him in the ass against Simone Patrizzi, and Pell might be able to provide as much resistance and fight that will cause Xhaferi to slow down in deeper water. But in terms of a talent for talent, skill for skill conversation, I think Xhaferi is the superior fighter here. He was actually plus 120 just a few days ago. I saw him balloon up to minus 135, and now the line has come back down to a pick'em line. So it seems like there is some public sentiment on Xhaferi out there, but just as much on the Pell side as well. I like Xhaferi. I think he wins this matchup. I think he dictates the pace. I think he ends up landing the better strikes. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up getting the finish within 2 rounds here as well. But I do like Xhaferi, and I'm going to go with him. And I feel pretty damn good about him as well. We have a rematch between Charles Joyner, who comes in at minus 330, and Yannick Bahati, who comes in at plus 255. Now, I quickly want to talk about the line movement on this fight, because in the first fight, we had Charles Joyner around a minus 800 favorite, I believe. I think I got like plus 600 on Bahati. I took a little bit of a nibble on him there. But now Joyner opened up closer to minus 150 for this rematch, was bet up to about minus 200 just a few days ago. And now he finds himself all the way up at minus 330. So, there is that initial hesitancy from a lot of people, but the ultimate confidence comes back on the Joyner side. Now, Joyner, very fun Muay Thai striker, loves to land knees to the body, very much active in terms of picking his opponents apart, but really focusing on that body to try to break his opponents down. He's very long, lanky, very active with his output as well, and it's clear that his takedown defense and get-ups are starting to improve, which will ultimately make him even more dangerous. Now, he's training alongside Mick Parkin and Tom Aspinall. Nice big bodies for him to get some time in with as well. And he knows that he needs to continue improving that grappling game if he wants to try to make it to the next level. Now, in Yannick Bahati, you're talking about a 17-fight veteran, or I guess 16 if you're going to call the no contest. Or actually, it was a draw in his last matchup against Joyner. We'll talk about that, how that fight went down very shortly. He's a guy who has not been all that active. This will only be his 4th fight since 2020. He's had about 3 fights canceled in between that time. He's 1-6, I guess 1-6-1 over his last 8 fights now. 5 of those 6 losses were against notable names though, like Dricus du Plessis, Mike Shipman, Damian Janikowski, Melvin Manhoof, and even Luke Traynor. He's strong, he's physical, he likes to implement that strength against his opponents in the clinch realm and eventually dragging them to the ground, and he showcased some very slick submissions in the past too. His striking, very robotic because of how muscle-bound he is, and he's also a little chinny at times, which is why he's been losing a lot of his matchups. He's 35 years old, turned 35 actually on the day of their first fight back in November. But yeah, let's quickly talk about how that last fight went. Close fight, much closer than the minus 800 on Joyner had indicated, but it was impressive to see some of the defensive grappling responsibilities of Joyner. He did still find himself in some bad spots, but I think if he showed just a tad bit more urgency with working back to his feet, he would be able to slow down Bahati even more and then allow him to be ripe for the picking with the striking that we knows that he can implement in this matchup. Bahati, again, not too much of a danger in the striking realm, but rather when he's able to back Joyner up against the cage, he was able to initiate the clinch and eventually drag him to the ground. It seemed like it was a fight that was 1-1 going into that last round, and Bahati was able to get the takedown. But once Joyner was able to reverse the position and work back to his feet, it seemed like momentum was clearly swinging in his favor, and he was going to be able to either finish Bahati late or at least utilize more damage to nullify the grappling success of Bahati from earlier in that round. Unfortunately, a ton of eye pokes from Joyner caused a stoppage to the fight and ultimately scored it a draw. But I think that we'll see Joyner learning a lot from that matchup. I think he has more tools to try to adjust from the mistakes that he made in that matchup than we'll actually see from Bahati. And obviously with the help of guys like Mick Parkin, Tom Aspinall, and Phil DeFries, we should see an even better version of Joyner here. So I think that Joyner will look much better than he did in his last matchup. And I think we'll see him pick apart Bahati and eventually find a finish within 2 rounds. Might give up a takedown or 2, but I don't think we'll see him spend as much time in a defensive position as we did in his last matchup. So, I really like Joyner in the spot to get the finish. All right, next up, Will Currie coming in at minus 165, going up against Eli Aronov, who comes in at plus 135. Now, Currie is looking to bounce back from his Contender Series loss to Jordan Santos from this past season, and I think it finally showcased to a lot of people that Currie was just being a little bit more hyped than he actually should have been. Although he did lose to Mixstat in a few fights before that, I think people were still very high on Currie, thinking that his physicality and his smothering style was going to be effective at the higher levels. In terms of the striking realm, he mainly brings an unorthodox and flashy kicking game to the table, but a lot of his offense is usually reserved for the grappling realm, looking to utilize his strength and physicality to overwhelm opponents in those positions, eventually work into positions where he can get off on finishes, whether it's with submissions or TKOs. That's what he wants to bring to the table and try to finish opponents with. He's going up against Eli Aronov, who also came up short on the Contender Series in his last outing, and it's been a long time since we've seen him in action, but apparently he's been on the sidelines with the Israeli and Palestinian war, but he's also been training a lot, helping a lot of his training partners. He's a Greco-Roman wrestler, very strong with that top position, showcasing he can go 15 minutes if he needs to. His striking obviously needs a lot of work, but he normally does a great job in terms of getting fights into the grappling realm immediately. I was very surprised to see him get caught in the armbar the way that he did against Zach Reese on the Contender Series, because he normally does a great job in terms of scrambling and getting out of bad spots and then reasserting himself into dominant positions. And I think that we'll see this be a pretty grueling matchup back and forth, but I think that Aronov, with his strength, will be able to shut down the game of Currie. This can be competitive early, but I think Aronov has a cardio advantage, and I think his scrambling is going to keep Currie in bad spots. Aronov also does not accept bad positions for long periods of time, which ultimately sees him either reverse positions or get back to his feet and then get to his wrestling where he can be the one to eventually get a dominant position. I love Aronov here as the underdog. I think he has more threat in the grappling realm, but I also think he has more fight in terms of not staying in bad positions for too long. If Currie can't get his game going within 3 or 4 minutes, I expect him to break and allow Aronov to dictate the pace of this matchup, allowing Aronov to grind this fight out, either get a late finish or win it on the scorecards. All right, co-main event time, where we got Nick Bagley coming in at minus 180, going up against Lopes, who comes in at plus 150. Now, Bagley looking to earn his he did earn his fourth straight victory last time out. Normally looking to take opponents to the ground and find that rear naked choke to get his win. All of his 5 last wins have come by rear naked choke. His other win came by arm triangle choke, showcasing that this guy loves to strangle people. He's very strong. He muscles and just powers his opponents to the ground with emphatic takedowns, and then from there he's pretty quick with finding the back and eventually working to a rear naked choke position. But the one loss that we saw on his record is a fight that he was forced to go the full 15 minutes, and we saw that if he can't get that early finish, his cardio starts to slow down and he eventually starts to break, letting opponents dictate the pace. His striking, he doesn't offer up much in that realm because he's obviously looking to get fights to the ground almost immediately. And again, the amount of strength and energy and explosiveness that he uses early, you can see why his cardio starts to suffer later on in matchups. But it's not often that we see him go into deep water because he's so good at strangling and finishing opponents very quickly. His opponent this weekend, Lopes, actually earned it or competed against Hardwick in a title fight. I believe that was back in November. And he had some solid success through the first 3 to 4 minutes, utilizing his power striking style to hurt Hardwick. But knowing Hardwick's durability, he was able to bounce back from that and then really slow Lopes down and eventually finish him in the 4th round of that matchup. That snapped an 11-fight winning streak for the Brazilian fighter, who was largely going out there and just knocking opponents out. His cardio has been a little bit of an issue at times, but he has won a few fights by decision. He still carries a lot of power even in deep matchups. Normally showcases decent grappling defense, utilizing a slick choke game of his own, especially when opponents get a little bit too overzealous in the grappling realm. And he's just 29 years old. This is a guy that can still improve his game. He's very dangerous. And this is going to be the toughest fight of Nick Bagley's career. Lopes is a BJJ brown belt, and I expect that early finishing threat of Bagley to be thwarted by Lopes. And then once they're forced to strike, I think Lopes can kind of dictate the pace here, and I think that will actually lead to him finding the big shot to put Bagley away. I think Bagley's a little bit of a deer in headlights on the feet, especially if he's tried to implement the grappling approach and it didn't bear any fruit. And I think that will leave Lopes, happy to just have target practice on Bagley going in the second or third rounds. Again, both guys have some grappling issues some cardio issues that need addressing, but I think the uncomfortable nature of Bagley in the striking realm will feed into Lopes' success early here. So as long as Lopes can defend those takedowns, it's obvious that grappling threat is going to be there right away from Bagley. But I expect Lopes' submission defense to hold up. And then from there on the feet, I think we'll see Bagley start to struggle to get this fight to the ground. And then from there, Lopes should be able to pick him apart and eventually find the finish. So give me the dog. Give me Lopes. Again, this is just a little bit too big of a step up for Bagley dealing with a guy as dangerous as Coenny Lopes. All right, next up is the main event, where we got Hardwick coming in at minus 800 going up against former LFA champion Javier Garcia, who comes in at plus 550. Now, starting off on the Hardwick side of things, as I just spoke about a little bit a few seconds ago, Hardwick is coming off of an impressive knockout victory over Coenny Lopes from a fight that was back in November. Again, he faced a little bit of adversity early, but really started to build momentum in the second and third rounds, which led to that fourth round finish by TKO. And he fights a lot like his brother George. They rely a lot on their durability, their cardio, their pace, and their output to wear opponents down, walking them down, utilizing combinations, maybe getting some grappling and just, not laying praying at all, but looking to get to positions where they can continuously hurt their opponents, try to apply a submission, or just smash through to another dominant position. And I'm very impressed with what I've been seeing from him. His brother got the Contender Series call in 2023. I think if Hardwick's successful on this card, he ends up getting the Contender Series call this season. He's a fun fighter. He's entertaining, he's charismatic, very fun style in terms of just all action, always moving forward, always creating chaos, and he often thrives in that chaos. Now, he's going up against Javier Garcia, who you really got a feel for. Now, he won the LFA title against Elijah Johns in a fight that ultimately was turned to a no contest because of a premature stoppage due to a submission that Johns obviously did not tap to. But that night, Garcia did get the LFA title wrapped around his waist, so he was a former LFA champion. But he was in line to be on the last season of The Ultimate Fighter, and then I believe the week of the starting of taping, he actually got passed out for somebody else. So he vacated his title before he knew that he wasn't going to be on the show. He vacated to be on the show, and then he went back to the regionals. He went to Cage Warriors, was able to pick up a very close split decision against former title challenger Roberto Hernandez, and then he was able to go on and defeat I believe 11-9 opponent for the LXF promotion back in October. Garcia sometimes allows his opponents to dictate the pace, which is obviously not that great of a look. He's a decent all-around fighter. I think where he wants to find most of his success is with the grappling. I think his jiu-jitsu and wrestling game is pretty solid for regional standards. He's 32 years old, I believe, has some solid regional experience. I think in this stage of his career, he's going to be more successful than, the form that he had before, which made him have a little bit more of a salty record. Solid fighter. This is a solid test for Harry Hardwick, but I think Hardwick's output and just ability to dictate the pace in fights will ultimately be the undoing of Garcia. Don't expect Garcia to just go away easily. I think that Garcia will try to get this into the grappling realm, and he might have some success, maybe winning the first round or the second round, but I think it's just a matter of time before Hardwick's style starts to catch up to Garcia. And like I said earlier, when I was breaking down the Samuel Silva and George Hardwick fight, usually when guys come from overseas, things really start to affect them, especially in deep waters. Maybe it's the travel, maybe it's the change in atmosphere, whatever it is. But I think that Garcia will start to fade in the second and third rounds, and that's where we see Hardwick really start to put his foot on the gas and start to run away with this in deep water. So I'm expecting Hardwick to get the finish probably in the fourth or fifth round. Garcia will be a formidable opponent, which is why I don't want to play the minus 800 on Hardwick here. But I think that he wins this matchup. I think he outlasts Garcia and finishes him, and still Cage Warriors champion Harry Hardwick. There you guys go. Breakdowns for all 14 fights on this Cage Warriors card. I try to be a little bit more brief with these guys, but it's so hard not to try to share all the information that I'm able to uncover about these guys. Maybe whether it helps you guys believe the prediction that I'm trying to portray to you guys, or even if you try to use some of those points against some of the predictions that I've been given. It is what it is. I want to give you guys the information, give you the conclusion that I come to, but I'll let you guys come to your own conclusions as well. All right, reminder, I'll have tracked and official plays for these on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Check the link in the description below for that. I'm also getting started on the LFA breakdowns as soon as I post this video, so make sure you guys check out the Lock of the Night Patreon page for that. Obviously, I'll have that LFA breakdown for you guys on Friday afternoon, so come back to the YouTube channel, check that out as well. And another reason for you to come back to the YouTube channel, later on today, I'll be dropping my Lockheed Two-Step / Lockheed Trinity free parlay for UFC London. This is your one-stop shop YouTube channel page. I'm telling you guys, there's so much on this YouTube channel, pretty much dropping a video every single day of UFC Fight Week, covering different angles of the card. So make sure you guys always come in and check out the page. We're about to hit 8,500 subscribers as well. So if you haven't already hit subscribe, please do. Definitely helps your boy out in that aspect. And then again, covering Cage Warriors, covering LFA. PFL starts in April. I'll have full card breakdowns for that as well. Contender series starting in August, so we're still a ways away from that, but I'll have breakdowns for that as well. Where else do you need to go? I got you guys covered. All right, I'll see you guys later today for the Lockheed Two-Step, Lockheed Trinity free parlay segment. Peace.